kind of random.
What does joining Hip Hop Now's Patreon mean? It means supporting the kind of hip-hop content that keeps you updated on the latest hip-hop news and moves. It means supporting the production of content like That Time in Hip Hop and Hip Hop Now Reviews. It means you care about the conversation and preservation of hip-hop music and culture. Hip Hop Now Patreon supporters get access to bonus content, merchandise, and more. Support the movement. Become a supporter of Hip Hop Now podcast today at patreon.com/hiphopnow.
Coming up on this week's episode of Hip Hop Now podcast, it's the 2021 preview show. Let's do it.
Let's get right to the business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic album. Classic album.
Come to Hip Hop Podcast.
What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip-hop, music, and culture that happened throughout the week, that happened throughout the year. Happy New Year to you and yours. Hope your family and you and your friends and, followers maybe on on social media have gotten through this year for the most part. You know what I'm saying? It's tough to say, had a good year because not many people have. But, if you're still here to hear this show, and obviously I'm still here, I'm thankful to even be here because there's many of us who didn't make it, in 2020. So it's been a tough year, but we definitely got to appreciate the fact that we're still here to carry on and keep being positive, man. So happy New Year to you and yours, man. Big shout out to the longtime listeners of this podcast. I appreciate your support throughout the years. And it feels funny to say the years, but when you're going over like almost 200 plus episodes, you realize like, wow, I've been doing this for a while. Consistently. Let me pat myself on the back for that. New listeners, maybe you're tuning in for the very first time and you're like, oh, word, I just discovered your podcast and I like it. I've had people say that and I appreciate you. I hope you subscribe. I hope you hit the like button wherever you listen. I hope you share with people enjoy this kind of content. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, leave a review. Or anywhere you can leave a review. Leave a review. Give up your honest opinion. I check the reviews from time to time. Right now, I think on Apple Podcasts, I'm pretty flawless, which is great. But I wouldn't be mad if it wasn't perfect because, honestly, that's feedback. Now, don't give me a bad review just to say, yo, you say something bad, Vegas, so I said something bad. Don't do that. Don't do that. All right, just give your honest opinion. If your honest opinion is that you like the show that much, then so be it. I appreciate you for doing that. Big shout out to the producers of this podcast, the people who have supported this podcast in 2020 through my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/hiphopnow. The link is in the description of this episode if you would like to click on it and go there and check it out. And if you don't know, it's all about supporting this podcast going forward into 2021, into 2022. And one thing I want to do in 2021, and I've been saying it for years, but I think it's a possibility in 2021, like a serious possibility. Because if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. And that is a video version of this podcast. Now, originally, I wanted to do this episode right out the gate, video version, but I am not prepared. And I'm just going to blame it on 2020. I know 2020 is the past, but whatever. I'm living in the past. All right. But I want to shout out those who have been supporting throughout the year because it showed me that there are people who care about the content enough to put money towards it on a monthly basis. And it's not saying that you have to do that on a monthly basis. it could be a one-time donation to the podcast. Whatever you can do, it's fine because that money goes right back into the production of this podcast. I was able to add a couple of elements to bring up the sound quality a little bit better, be a little bit more mobile with what I'm doing with the production on the back end. I even put out a video on my Patreon page showing things that I purchased and how I use them. And I'm using them right now because I'm a man of my word. So big shout out to the Patreon supporters. And if you would like to become a supporter of Hip Hop Now Podcast, just visit patreon.com/Hip Hop Now. Big shout out to all of the sites that I usually curate stories from to talk about on this podcast. There's a lot of people who approach me and don't understand what this show is about, right? Yo, can I get an interview? Look, this is how it starts. There's some little inside baseball. Yo, I love your podcast. Can I get an interview? I got this new rapper, DJ Scooby-Doo shirts. I just made that up, but that's his name, right? And I say to myself, wow, this person can't love my podcast because I've never done an interview. So why would they think I can do one now? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's certain things I decided from day one I wasn't going to do. Nothing against artists. I'm an artist. It has more to do with keeping a specific focus in the content of this show so that those who are interested in this specific content will come here for this exclusively. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't want to hear interviews, but I feel like every hip-hop podcast out there, for the most part, does interviews or does a couple of different things, right? Hip Hop Now Podcast is about news you can use as a hip-hop fan, period. The only thing that makes it unique to me is I give my perspective on a lot of the stories, all of the stories, to be honest. And part of that is because I have a history in hip hop, and it's not just as a fan. I've been a DJ, I've been a rapper, I've been a radio host who's hosted a hip hop show. Shout out to Strictly Hip Hop, 30 plus years strong. I've done a couple of things, and I have a couple of reasons why I felt qualified to talk about it, right? Before I had a podcast, I used to do this on a radio show, so it's nothing new. But nevertheless, that's the show as it was when it started. That's the show currently, and that's the show going forward. Unless something changes or there's some unique way I can approach doing interviews or spotlighting artists, I will let you know. But until now, this is what you get. Now, before we get into the whole 2021 preview, I know I gave you a little opening, but I had to because this is a show that's less about the news and more about reflecting, right? And we just reflected off this podcast and how I feel and all that good stuff. But I'd be remiss if I didn't briefly acknowledge the passing of Ecstasy, of Houdini, Shabba-Doo, but you might know him as Ozone from Breaking. And most recently, as far as the news that hit, MF Doom, and to some, way back in the days, in the early 90s, early mid-90s, Zev Love X. These three brothers passed away recently, all contributed to hip-hop in very unique ways. Obviously, Ecstasy being a part of a legendary hip-hop group in Houdini, a very unique hip-hop group, a group that doesn't get their flowers when we talk about some of the best groups in hip-hop of all time. Houdini was large. You know what I'm saying? If I'm going to take it to the old school, let's take it to the old school. Houdini was large, right? They were huge. You know what I'm saying? And they had a different sound. They weren't Run DMC. You know what I'm saying? It was totally different for how they rhymed. They had hits out they had a couple of hits, Friends, 5 Minutes of Funk, if you're from the NYC area, Video Music Box back in the days. That was the like the theme song. Such a dope group, and Ecstasy was one of those rappers who was more like a poet when he rhymed, right? He was a true MC, a master of ceremonies. He kind of commanded your attention when he rapped because he spoke and rapped with so much clarity, right, and skill. And it's just, it's sad that a lot of people learned about him when he passed away, because you see, Ecstasy's trending on social media, and you're this huge hip hop fan and you've never heard of him before, and you've never heard of Houdini before. But I'm not saying that as that's the worst thing in the world or trying to get at somebody for not knowing. I just wish more people knew while he was still here, so he can see that appreciation firsthand from younger fans, not just old heads like myself and people older than me who were around during those times. Also, Shabba-Doo, Ozone, you know what I'm saying? Breaking, you know what I'm saying? That was literally bringing hip hop to the mainstream with authentic dancers, you know what I'm saying? Not dancers who was like, oh, I learned hip hop and now they're making this film and I'm going to be the guy who represents what it is to break dance. Nah, man, these is true blue, true school, nice with it dancer from back in the day. If you don't own breaking, you've never seen it, I'd advise you do, man. It was around the time where hip hop commercially was becoming a big deal. I mean, obviously there was a movie about breakdancing. Okay, that says a lot, right? It's about breakdancing, not dirty dancing, breakdancing. So now you got served breakdancing. But it was, don't watch the second one though. It's really trash. Electric Boogaloo. But if you watch Breaking, you don't even understand how much I idolize and mimic the moves of Turbo and Ozone. So definitely a huge loss for hip hop right there. And lastly, MF Doom, aka Zev Love X. Apparently, he passed away 2 months ago. I'm recording this on January 1st, 2021. It still feels funny to say that. Don't even know if I said it right. I've been drinking. Sorry. But nevertheless, I heard he passed away like around Halloween or something like that. A definite loss for hip hop in a lot of respects, right? Here's one. I've never been the biggest MF Doom fan. I can be honest about that because I'm not really here to clout chase or to get people to like me and feel like, oh, he's true, authentic hip hop because he likes MF Doom. Do I own a couple of MF Doom albums? Actually, I do. I have a complicated history with him, right? And I'll briefly just tell you what it is, and it will all lead into why I respect him and his craft. I was a big fan of KMD, which is the group Zev Love X, aka MF Doom, was originally a part of back in the early 90s. I thought Zev Love X was nice. When he appeared on the Third Base record, Gas Face, I was like, man, I can't wait when is his album coming out? I thought he was dope. Then he had the record Peach Fuzz, and I just thought he was dope. He had a charisma about the way he spit. And, fast forward years later, after his brother passed away, Sub Rock, I think it was due to an accident. I can't remember exactly. And I remember it took a toll on him. And then their sophomore album got shelved. It was actually released recently, recent years, I should say. And I just remember like falling out with that because, their debut album came out, but when hip hop changed, I changed. You don't see Zev Love X anymore around, so you forget about him. And I remember this is late 90s when I first heard about MF Doom because I was hosting a radio show and somebody wanted to hear some songs be played from MF Doom. And I remember thinking like, oh, I think I got that CD. I think it came in. And I went and listened to it, right? And I was just like, yo, what the hell is this? because it literally sound like random rhyming, right? It just sound like quotes, and I just it was just so unorthodox to me. It was whack to me, right? So I was like, I don't know if I could play this. This might be something this one person or this one or two people wanted to hear. I don't know if I could play it. So I ignored it. And then a friend of mine told me, yo, you know that cat MF Doom? And I was like, yeah, I heard that trash. He told me, like, yo, you know that Zev Love X from KMD? Now a light bulb goes off my head, right? Because I just told you, I love Zev Love X. So if he's returned to hip hop, I'm like, oh, word? But then I was like, but why'd he change so much? And I at first I didn't get it because I just was kind of turned off a little bit because I had this idea of who he was as a rapper and who he was now as MF Doom versus Zev Love X was so different that I just couldn't get with it. So I continued to ignore it. And I remember I constantly saw albums come out. Mad Villainy came out, and I would hear things, and there would be requests. And every now and again, I would hit the requests because they were requests. You know what I'm saying? And then I started to understand why people liked it, and I realized it was more about the technique and less about head nod. Right? Obviously, it's beats and bars. You can nod your head, but it was less about that, and it was more about what he's doing, his technique, the way he wrote his rhymes, the way he put his words together. And then the mask, the persona, the humor. And then I kind of got it. And I was like, oh, I see why people like him. This is different. I was afraid, right? Because I was so in love with what he used to be that I didn't want it to be anything else. So long story short, I did find an appreciation for his music. I'm not going to even lie and say I like everything, but I have my favorites, obviously. Rest in peace to that brother, man. Rest in peace to all three of these brothers who recently passed away, the tail end of 2020. Major contributions to the hip hop game, influences big time on the hip hop game for different reasons. Look them up, learn their history, go listen to some of that music after you've already learned about them. And you'll see why people are flooding social media with rest in peace and video clips and everything. That's how much of an impact these guys had, even though you didn't hear their name, coming out the mouths of every single hip hop fan in the world all the time. Right. Now, let's reflect on a year that was 2020. Recently, I did a video. The link is in the description. My top 5 and one honorable mention of 2020. Also was included on the episode of That Time in Hip Hop. Shout out to Tony, and we had a guest. Shout out to Earl Ill Fam on Twitter. And we talked about, some of the best albums of the year. I gave my top 5. And if you want to hear me elaborate on that, you can check that video out. Again, the link is in the description of this podcast. It's on YouTube. The name of the show is called That Time in Hip Hop. And typically, I do one of those for this podcast, right? I come on here and I tell y'all my top 5 and my honorable mentions. But I kind of feel like on that episode, I kind of got it out there, right? I got it out of my system. So all I would be doing here is repeating myself. 2020 was a year that started off like pretty slow for obvious reasons, right? We have a pandemic going on. People don't know what's happening. People don't know whether they should release their music now or wait, or if this is temporary or whatever the case may be, right? It seemed like there was a drought by the time the summer hit. So there was really only like, I had a top 5, and there wasn't no other albums that were like competing for it because there wasn't much that was out. And then the albums that were out that were great, and they were the top 5. And then once the summer hit, we got flooded from everybody, right? We got all kinds of releases. But some of the things that I talked about in my 2020 preview around this time last year that were kind of like my hopefuls kind of shocked me, right? We got not one, but 2 Jay Electronica albums. Now, I know it's easy for me to probably every year I say, oh, I think Jay Electronica is coming out. But I felt like 2020 was the year because I felt like there were hints out there that something was going to happen. Now, we could have never predicted that the first album we got from Jay Electronica would literally feature Jay-Z on every record and make my top 5 even still. But then exclusive, I think it's still exclusive to Tidal, the album that was supposed to be released in 2012, I think. But his original album was actually released in addition to the album with Jay-Z, which was called A Written Testimony. So it was weird, right? It was like, oh wow, we finally got Jay Electronica music, y'all. Finally, we got one with Jay-Z and we got the joint that was supposed to come out. And both are very different. Obviously, A Written Testimony I liked enough to put it in my top 5. Act 2 was cool, but it was more of a too little, too late, if you ask me. Not a bad album, in my opinion. Not just nothing crazy. It didn't make me feel like, man, if this would have came out. But there was just so much that came out, right? Griselda did their thing. As usual, they got bigger and better. Released some major projects with with different sounds, right? Westside Gunn might have released about 5 albums. A couple of other people like Stove God Cooks comes out of nowhere with an album that the underground loves to death. Trust me, it's the underground because I've seen a lot of publications. It's not showing up in a top 10, but when it comes to heads, we salute that album, right? Royce da 5'9" put a powerful album out. Nas came back with an album that we actually liked this time. So it was a lot. It was a lot happening in 2020 musically. The Grammys decided they was actually going to make a credible nominees list for album of the year, which was kind of funny to see, to be honest. And I don't know if everybody deserved to be in it because I just didn't expect to see it. I just didn't expect to see that. But nevertheless, overall, when it comes to hip-hop releases, there was just so many dope things, right? Busta Rhymes finally came out with an album. You got a Firm reunion. It was just a lot of dope stuff that happened in hip-hop as far as the music. And it makes you wonder what 2021 is going to hold for that. One unfortunate thing with hip hop that seemed to be a trend, but honestly, it was a trend before 2020. It just wasn't, people weren't paying that close attention to it. But a lot of young rappers dying, right? For different reasons, like, and mostly violence. Couple of rappers, like, it was like a week where a couple of rappers, including Benny the Butcher and Boosie, got shot. And it was a couple of people who got shot at, some false rest in peace, some real ones like, Pop Smoke. Like it was really a bad year in that regard. And I remember when Jim Jones said something that was really stupid to say, but maybe he didn't mean it like that. Maybe he just felt that way in a moment. I'm making excuses for him, but when he said hip hop, being a rap artist is the most dangerous job in the world, which is a lie, right? It's not. Being a cop, being a soldier, shit, there's some real dangerous jobs that ain't even a cop and a soldier. Hip hop, being a rap artist is the most dangerous artist to be, right? Because country music artists ain't getting shot up like this, right? Pretty sure they got their crazy fans or their situations, but hip hop is surrounded by it. And some people will say, "Well, it's the lyrics, it's the music. If you wouldn't rap about it, it wouldn't happen." That's not true. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the business, right? It's the part of the business that people who aspire to be on ignore. They pretend it's not there because they're too enamored by the videos and the beats and the rhymes and the attention and the fame they get that they don't realize that dudes can't go to the supermarket though, right? Benny the Butcher can't just wear all his jewelry and be Benny the Butcher with a couple of friends going to Walmart. Somebody's looking at you like, oh, word? Okay, payday. I want that jewelry. You just can't. Now, maybe it's because of the way rappers dress. I would say so, right? Yeah, why are you wearing that much jewelry to Walmart? Why are you dressed like that to go to Walmart? You know, he should be able to dress the way he dressed, but in hip hop, unfortunately, we've just attracted too much violence from what we talk about, what we get involved with. That's probably the biggest part, what we get involved with, because what we talk about has always been there. But it's just been a bad year for this in general. And I just hope that rappers move differently in 2020 to minimize their situations. We don't need to see everything on the gram. You don't have to tell us everything. You know, if everything's in the music and it's about entertainment, leave it there. You don't have to show us everything. You don't have to put everything on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, because there's somebody watching you who doesn't have a dime. And you saying you're going to be at this show with this jewelry on, and I'm already looking in the background seeing maybe 2 or 3 dudes who ain't on point because they're not security. They just your homies. They don't know how to watch your back properly. Just stop it. Stop with the money on the gram. We know you're making money. We see your chain. Holding it is not going to tell me nothing more than I already know. All it does is invite wolves, and nobody needs to die, right? That wasn't all of 2020, obviously. There was a lot of good, but 2020 was a very complicated year for hip-hop. I'm just glad we got a lot of dope music. You know, Busta finally put out an album. It was a great year overall musically. Now, to end this off, I'm going to do what I did last year that I like to do every year, is what do I want to see in 2021? And I'm just going to keep this to the music because that's what I want to see in 2021. Obviously, I want to see what the big three, you know, the younger generation, not really that younger, but you know what I'm talking about. Drake, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, all 3 are due to drop an album soon. All 3, as far as I can see, are sitting on new music for this new year. And they're probably waiting for the pandemic to end to really take advantage of it. But I know we're going to get music from those 3 because it's about time, honestly. They're about due an album. I'm also going to say we probably might see a Jay-Z album, right? Because we kind of got one with him and Jay Electronica, but kind of not, but we kind of did. I think Jay-Z's about due a new album. I also think Dr. Dre is working on an album. I'm almost positive that's happening. Now, I could be wrong. We know Dre's a perfectionist. We know he doesn't just put music out, right? He gotta 100% be into it, love it, feel like it's the thing, and this is the energy and where things should go. And I could see him putting an album out. Now, will it be Detox? I doubt it. I think he's too much of a perfectionist to put that out. I think he's moved on mentally from Detox, which is fine. We'll get it one day. Don't worry. We will. But maybe that'll happen. Also, we heard at the beginning or the end of 2019 that Black Star's album was done, which I believe was completely produced by Madlib. So looking forward to seeing when that drops. I get the feeling this will be the year in 2021 where we definitely get it. Recently, we see a picture of LL Cool J in the studio with Q-Tip. Is this just a song? I don't know. I mean, Busta finally dropped his album that he talked about forever, so maybe we'll get a new LL album. LL is about overdue a dope album, probably his last dope album. Got to be encouraged by what Busta Rhymes did. Busta Rhymes set the formula for being nostalgic, but not being dated, and still putting out a very dope album. I think Busta basically laid the blueprint for those rappers who are still popular, but not as active as a Jay-Z or Nas, right? And an LL in the studio with Q-Tip is tempting, but who's to say it's good? We don't know until we hear it, right? One thing I've been hoping for is that Havoc is working on a Mobb Deep album, right? Gathering some Prodigy verses and essentially doing what DJ Premier did with Guru verses, right? He put out a whole Gangstar album in, 2019, I believe? Put out a Gangstar album, and it was actually good. And it didn't sound bad at all. So I'm hoping Havoc has enough Prodigy verses and the clearance to put something together so we get that one last Mobb Deep album, because it would be dope. It just would be dope. Other hopes, obviously there's surprises. There's people who've been dropping all the time. I'm pretty sure Griselda Records, Conway the Machine. I mean, I thought his last album, From King to a God, was his Shady release, and it was not. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Conway the Machine's Shady Records release sounds like. So that's another option. And obviously, Benny the Butcher, whatever else he has coming down the pipe, because the project with Hit Boy was dope, which is a Burden of Proof, very dope. But I remember he was working on something else before he even talked about that originally. So, again, there's a lot of your favorite MCs are sitting on music. You got Redman, who's been talking about Muddy Waters 2 forever. You got AZ, who's been talking about Do or Die 2 forever. And you got Ghostface, who's been talking about, what was he doing again? Supreme Clientele 2. But probably more importantly, he's executive producer of the new Wu-Tang album. So maybe we'll get that. And maybe we'll get the second season to the Wu-Tang series on Hulu, because I thought that was a very dope series. I really fell in love with it after watching that first season. So those are a couple of my wishes and hopes for the year 2021. Obviously, I'm wishing everybody great health and get that bag, whatever you want to say, you know what I'm saying? Don't be a prick in 2021, you know what I'm saying? It's been a trying year in 2020, trying to, to cope with things that have been going on, and with the pandemic and everything else. It's been a lot of loss of life. There's a lot of people who lost loved ones to this pandemic, and they're not really talking about it. So you really need to keep in mind that not everybody's happy. I've been fortunate to have a job not only where my pay wasn't affected whatsoever, but I was able to work from home the entire time, really not miss a beat with anything, and in a lot of ways save money because I'm not commuting. So, I have a house. I am lucky compared to a lot of people. Obviously, there are things I worked for, so it's not 100% luck. But at the same time, the situation could be so different because this is a different situation. You know what I'm saying? I could have easily been laid off and been in the same shoes as the next man or woman. So I'm wishing everybody nothing but success in 2020, and go out and support hip hop, man, because we all love hip hop, right? That's what we're here for, right? That's going to do it for me. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at VegasWorldINC. And please check out my best of 2020. Link is in the description. It's on the podcast, That Time in Hip Hop. And also in this description, if you have Apple Music, and I might do one for Spotify, I'm not sure yet, but if you have Apple Music, there is a link to a playlist that I curated myself that has songs from some of the best albums of 2020. And trust me, it is perfect for the gym, for the ride, to catch up and discover music. And it's not just my top 5. It's a number of albums that I thought were honorable mentions. It's songs from everywhere. It's a dope playlist, I might say myself. The link is in the description. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Happy New Year.
Drop it on the random.